Hey there, YouTubers. I'm Pruitt. This is Jim Davis. And on today's WebDM, we're going to be talking about elves, so you can tell that one player why he can't play Legolas. Let's start talking about race.
Finally.
Wait a minute. Hang on. Let's backtrack. Let's talk about the race of elves.
Let's talk about the race of elves. Elves are one of those player character races that I personally love to hate. Even though I do find myself playing plenty of elves.
That's true. Why do you like playing elves then? Let's start there. Why do you like? What do you like about elves?
Oh man, I like elves because in theory they're sort of these graceful, arcane. They suggest a certain gravity of character, or a nobility or a majesty that if I want to impart that on a character, I will. Now I have some elven characters I play out of Legacy. I do have characters that I remake because I like the concept or like thinking that this character has adventured this entire time, and I just keep revisiting them at different points in their career,
dropping back every century or so.
Right. So in that respect, elves being long-lived allow me to do that.
I can sense some apprehension. So other than their starting height requirements, how do elves fall short in your opinion?
I just think that they're both not Tolkien enough, and too Tolkien. And so like they just
that's a fine edge that I think only an elf could craft.
All right, so we've got Tolkien elves, and for our viewers, I'm not a Tolkien scholar. The lore is fascinating, but I'm not up. It's been a while since I brushed up on it.
But compared to a layman,
so like the elves, different kinds of elves are what they are and have the abilities that they have because they traveled a certain distance toward the light of heaven, and some of them made the journey across the sea and they dwelt there for a while, and then there was the whole thing with the jewels, the Silmarils, and then the civil war that followed that, and Melkor and Sauron, of course, all that. And elves are tied up in that setting so much and so intimately that to just pluck them as a concept out of Middle-earth and drop them into Greyhawk, drop them into Forgotten Realms, drop them over here. Even if you try I'm going to dust them off, put another jacket on it. No, they're Tolkien elves. When you take them out of the context of Middle-earth, they lose something. Elves in Middle-earth they're tragic. They have a kind of sadness to them, and grief is a big part of being an elf, right? They live forever. They have to deal with all of the crap that Melkor and Sauron and all the other forces of darkness have polluted Middle-earth with. That weighs heavily on them. That's why Tolkien's elves work. And it's difficult to replicate that. Yeah. And it's difficult for just DMs who are just trying to come up with a thing, and they're just trying to do their campaign, and they're not linguistic scholars with a huge background in history and mythology and the time and ability to write and craft these worlds. They just want a gameable setting and a gameable world. But then they turn to these tropes and they turn to these characters, and it's just like, well, it just doesn't work as much. Like, let's talk a bit about what it means to put a new spin on elves. So what are some of the qualities, some of those things that I liked about elves? There's a certain majesty to them, a certain grace, suggestions of a nobility of character.
An affinity for magic, usually.
An affinity for magic. I like both playing up the fey traits of the elves, including maybe like ascribing some traditional fairy characteristics to elves themselves. Like maybe they can't lie. Maybe an elf just chooses not to. Or lying isn't a part of their culture, so they're incredibly truthful. But at the same time, they're also circumspect, so that they don't necessarily give away too much.
They're obtuse. Yes.
Right. Perhaps there's sort of elaborate gift-giving rituals in your, that you use to role-play your elves, or sort of like try to differentiate them. So drawing on
easily make a faux pas.
They
offend the elves.
Offend the elves because they just have bizarre, elaborate rules of etiquette and just playing up the wildness of them. Yeah. So if they're connected to the Fey wild, they are Fey creatures, then there should perhaps be something dangerous about elves. Even like high elf dignitaries and nobles, there should just be an edge of just like, well, they kind of look like people. They kind of look like humans. They're our allies. But let's never forget that they lived for 600 or 700 years. That they have mastered magic to the point where the natural order of things no longer has any real meaning for them.
Right.
For whatever reason, we trust that they see us as our allies. We trust that they're not secretly controlling things behind the screen. We trust that they are, that their intentions towards, nobility and justice and order and everything are true, but you can never be quite certain with an elf.
Right, right.
Because they're just a little too aloof. a little too alien. So that's kind of one way you can take it. Play
Yeah.
up their alienness. Maybe have them actually be not just from the Feywild, but from another dimension. So in my homebrew setting that I use a lot, that's where elves come from. They ruined their world.
Yeah.
They had a magical civil war, and it created Mad Max over there.
Yeah.
And some of them fled and arrived in the campaign setting world, maybe 100,000 of them at best. And they're like, hey, let's hang out here. And so elves remain, they maintain a distance. And they don't get involved in human politics that much outside of an embassy at the imperial court. And so in that respect, it's just a little bit different. There are some that take it even to a further extreme where elves are really and truly alien until they get into like the villain category. They show up in your dimension or you're on your plane and it's just like, yeah, we really don't care about who any of you people are. We're elves.
And we're going to take everything over.
We're going to take everything
Like
over.
the Roman Empire, you know.
Basically, yeah, because they can.
Yeah.
And so I think that
Spreading the light of elves.
spreading the light of their elfdom. That's sort of one way that you can take and make elves a little bit different. Play up their alienness. You know, if you're playing one yourself, find out what it is about being an elf that you really like. What is it? What is that elf quality that you really like? And finding maybe a different way or a different take, particularly like working with your DM to see like, what are elves like in your world? Is there a way to make them a little different? So like when you're talking about the elven culture that's in this campaign setting that you're cooking up, it's like there's some differences to them, who they are willing to ally themselves with.
I wanted an elven kingdom, or they just reside in this one immense forest, but they are inside the human kingdom,
Right, sort of
and
like
have
a
worked out.
enclave.
But they have worked it out with them, like, hey, the border of these woods are ours. We'll allow some passage through.
Yeah.
Via our system of pulleys and
zip lines.
zip lines. We'll allow commerce and your rafts and your barges of goods to go through our land on the river, and we will keep them secure. But nobody's on them.
But nobody's in here.
Nobody's on them.
Right.
You don't get to just pass through our lands,
Right.
and it's good for them, and they're
Yeah.
fine with that because hey, they have the cushion, the buffer of the human kingdom, protecting them from enemies,
Right.
and they maintain their autonomy.
So
Now,
it's
of course,
kind of
there's
an aloofness mixed
Yeah.
with a recognition that they have to coexist.
Now there's other reasons
Right.
for that and why
Which we
they're
would-
secure in that.
Presumably get to uncover if we played
Yeah.
played some adventures there.
I just thought like that's an interesting way,
And I think sometimes all it takes is just that. Like, is there something different enough that presents them, like, okay, elves traditionally are seen as standoffish and aloof. You've decided, like, there's a good reason for that, and here's how it sort of works out. It's
Yeah.
it's sort of thought out. One of the things that I find with elves that always really gets under my skin is that worldwide there's only one type of elf. It's good to say, no, these are just the elves of this one forest,
Right.
or this one particular elf kingdom. There may be other elves in other parts of the world that have
Yeah.
a different relationship or different type of culture, but
Well-
monoculture amongst most demi-humans, but especially elves, it just gets kind of under my skin.
Well, I was gonna let's go on to the different types because depending on the setting or whatever, I mean, there used to be tons of types of elves that they've kind of like
Types of elves.
that they've just shrunken down into the 3 in the player's
Into the
handbook.
3. So that's one of the things I like about 5th edition. They've reined in the different types of elves. At one point, you were talking about wood elves and wild elves and sun elves and moon elves and gray elves and fey elves and flying elves and sea elves and snow elves and just
Shadow elves.
shadow elves and just like all over the place, and drow and dark elves and all these other things. It's just like, all right, now we just got 3. High elf covers a range of different types of elf. Wood elf covers a range of different types of elf. Drow presumably can cover more than just drow from Minza Branson, but
Right.
a whole bunch of different kinds of dark elves. So I think that in that respect, kind of collapsing them down mechanically was a good thing.
Right.
I think that in terms of role-playing potential and just to offer variety, that as much time as a DM is spending on creating vast and varied and complex human civilizations, they should spend that much time doing so with the dwarves, elves.
Yeah.
And particularly a race like elf, which is sort of, in campaign worlds, there's always once a great elf civilization that's now fallen. Or that they are sort of the height of magic use. They're sort of the archmages and high magic and the mythals that they can create. You owe it to your setting to kind of give it some thought. Maybe come up with 3 or 4 different types of high elf.
Maybe like a noble cast.
Right.
And even like a peasant cast of high elf.
Sure.
Which
yeah.
hey, because then you could play up like racial inequity Where the nobles are looking at the peasant high elves, well, at least you're not human.
At least you're not human. Yes, you kind of play up those kinds. Those sorts of
if that's how you want to go with it, if you want to make them more antagonistic.
I think so, and and there's some DMs who want to play up those tensions. Certainly, if you're playing in a setting that's more like The Witcher as opposed to traditional D&D fantasy, the tensions between elves, dwarves, humans, halflings, etc., are all going to run high.
Right.
But I think just giving it some thought, and so to use an example from Forgotten Realms, like there's the elves of Silvery Moon, and there's the elves of sort of Evermeet, and at least there's some variation there. And just take a minute to see, like, okay, what are all the different things that I can do with elves? What are some, maybe there's a couple of human cultures that you thought up that you can take some ideas from them, maybe have 2 less human cultures to make sort of 2 different elven cultures, and just present something that's more than just one single monoculture.
Right. Either you're a high elf and you're good at like beauty and poetry and art and magic, or you're a wood elf and you're in the woods and you shoot a bow.
First off, this is one of those things that you can easily farm out to your players.
Yeah.
If you just don't want to worry about it, be like, you're the only elf in the party. I don't plan on having a lot of them feature strongly in the campaign. Tell me what the society looks like. You tell me what the culture looks like.
Yeah, what's your hometown? What's it like there?
All right, engage in some collaborative building up of the setting.
Plus, that makes it gets your players to be a little bit more engaged in the setting and feel like they have some input.
It gets them invested. It gets them interested. It's no longer like the setting is just this ironclad thing that exists independently of the game, but it's something that you come together and make as a group during the game session. I don't know. There's a lot of things about Elven society and Elven culture that I'm curious about, and I think what does an Elven peasant look like? How do they live in the forest? Is it like Robin Hood over there, and they're all in sort of primitive tree shacks, or is this like they sing the trees into the shapes they need, and the forest just gives them, the fruits and root vegetables and all, the animals just willingly walk into their snares if they even eat meat. There's just like how
probably vegan,
right?
Like an elf coming in, like, well, no, sorry.
How do they make bowstring?
I can't. I can't have that leg of mutton. I'm on a cleanse right now.
I'm on a cleanse right now. I'm on a juice cleanse.
So yeah.
Those are little touches, like say how the elves live, or what happens when you visit them in their forest, are ways that the DM, in describing those environments, can present a truly unique culture or something that's just a little different. Or the players can work into their background and be like, maybe Wood Elf society is like based on who gets to live in the tree, and there are some people that get to live way up here in the tree, and other people got to stay down here on the ground, and like. That's where you were at in the, elven tree hierarchy or something. Or maybe not. Or maybe it's like a radical egalitarianism amongst the elves. And they're like, they share everything. And they just, it's just really different.
How close to Native Americans do you go? Living with the land and on the land. I mean, it's a good basis. It's kind of...
if you are, of course, you want to be a little sensitive to it. You want to make sure you're not... just like blatantly ripping off stuff, but you're inspired by something.
Well, yeah.
And you're
the idea
inspired
of how to live and not waste anything, and that concept.
Indigenous cultures or Native American cultures is a good starting point for that. I can see using like Celtic cultures as well. They're sort of like themes that come out that I think would be fun for the elves, particularly like their connection with druids. Yeah. I mean, druids feature prominently amongst, say, wood elven civilizations. Those are things that I might draw an inspiration from, just to see like, I want something different, or I want to be inspired by something, a real world example.
Like Mongolian horse culture?
Maybe we've got a Mongolian horse culture elves. In terms of D&D settings, the most interesting elves I can think of, the ones that I like the most, are Eberron. Yeah. And this is probably no surprise to our viewers by now. I love Eberron. It's one of my favorite settings. But the ancestor worshipping, necromancy using, you don't really get to die because we're going to bring you back as some sort of undead, elves are a really interesting way of sort of interpreting how they would view their long life. Why they might be like, we might have really long lives. That's a lot of knowledge to just let go of. We should keep this around. And then those elves who sort of have a different take on ancestor worship. It's like we have to emulate the deeds of our ancestors, and like actually the act of invading this country is honoring their memory of a battle so long ago. And so both things sort of play off the longevity of elves, and
it's the ultimate high school football thing. Like, gotta live the glory of your dad.
Right.
Let's talk about the drow.
Okay, we can talk about drow.
We kind of talked about high elves and wood elves and Eberron.
Yeah, there's surface elves, which are all...
So how do you drow?
How drow?
How to drow? Because of the Dress novels,
Yes, because of Drist.
That's
he's the elephant in the room.
It is elfulent. No,
Elfulent.
No, that's just not. There's this idea that drow elves are just evil and twisted, and if you want to play a drow that's not, you're gonna have to have some kind of.
And how do you not become just emo drow?
Yeah.
First of all, I really like drow, and I'm not such a fan of the Drist novels. But I do like the drow, and I like Salvatore's contribution to drow culture in terms of D&D lore. I like the drow from the Queen of the Demon Web Pit sort of module, where it's like this is the first time the party or anyone else for that matter is encountering these creatures, and then you get to their city deep under the earth, and you can engage in sort of the political backstabbing of it. And so I guess there's some of that with Minza Branson. Now that take the drow from Greyhawk, you transport them into the Underdark of Forgotten Realms. Of course, there is an Underdark on Earth. I just like it. There's something about the civilization and the culture. They make good foils. They make good enemies. I don't see them as all of them irredeemably nasty evil. It's like they're under the yoke of this demon goddess who keeps them at each other's throats, who promotes the most ruthless amongst them, who says everyone else out there hates you. Yeah. And it's just, you almost have there's a part of me that like reads about the drow and I go, man, they really got the raw end of the stick. It's like this one demon goddess has a beef with her crazy androgynous boyfriend over here, and he kicks her out, and now she's a giant spider, and then she's going to like corrupt the rest of her people with her. And so there's a certain tragedy to drow that I like. I like playing up the edge cases of them. Are there drow who are born and just hate the whole thing? Right. And they never buy into the cruelty and deception and backstabbing and dominance that's in drow society, and they go, as soon as they can, they make a break for it.
Yeah. But they're probably not going to get away without any scars, though.
They're certainly going to be psychological scars. So how do you play them and not be emo?
Right.
I don't know. You can not be mopey about it. If your drow can not be mopey. I played a drow who was suspicious of everything, trusted no one, other than people who he'd sort of like shed blood with, and he'd learned to trust through their deeds. The party, aka the party.
Right.
Deferential to female authority.
Right.
Even if it was just like a barmaid or whatever, it's an automatic instinct for him.
Right.
And deferential to priestly authority. And so he would never argue with a priest. He would usually always be like, "Yeah, sure, we'll do that," whatever. But he also sleeps in an anti-magic shell because it's the only place he feels truly safe.
Right.
He routinely uses disguised self to make sure that no one quite knows where he is on the ship. He covers himself in amulets of proof against detection and location, rings of mind shielding, and Nistel's magic aura. I mean, he's suspicious to the extreme because he grew up in a society, and the drow from that particular world apparently weren't even as bad as Minza Branson. So he just,
no, not really. I just saw them as like kind of ruthless capitalist info brokers.
Right.
Like, information is power.
Information
and
is
we
power.
can get any information you need.
Right.
And we don't really have any scruples about how we do that.
Right.
It's not really murderous or whatever. They'll do what needs to be done to get the job done.
Yeah. So I think if you're going to play a drow, and for him that translated into extreme suspicion.
Yeah.
So I think if you're going to play a drow and you don't necessarily want to be emo drow, find a way that you can role play out what you see as your drows, the pain that they clearly must feel. What if you played a female drow from Minza Branson who escaped? She'd gone through some of the priesthood of Lolth. She was rejected for some reason, set to be turned into a Drider, and she booked it out of there.
Right.
With the help of some clerics of Elistrai, she makes it to the surface. But now she's grown up in a society that's told her she is at the pinnacle of it, that everyone and everything that she talks to must obey her. Used to using violence to get her way. But all of that's she'd like to leave that behind. But when things get tense, maybe she slips back in the old role, and the whip comes out, and orders start being barked, and then afterwards, hey, so during that fight, you were really laying it on thick.
Yeah.
Just FYI.
Yeah. It is a comfortable cloak to put back on, right?
It's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to totally Lolth out on you.
Yeah.
I don't know. What if you played a drow? Look at some of the other drow gods and see if there's inspiration there. You don't have to be evil. You don't have to be cruel. And even if you are evil or cruel, for the sake of party cohesion, you probably should not inflict that on your fellow players.
Well, that's
Yeah, but I like the idea of a murderous, cutthroat, demonically influenced society that's the only place it could be is deep underground, cut off from everyone else, where they're constantly told, the world hates you, the world hates you, you have to be strong, the world hates you.
Yeah, kind of like North Korea.
Right, and then they get out of there. Well, of course, most people do hate drow because they kidnap you in the middle of the night and drag you underground and do all kinds of nasty things to you. But eventually, maybe somebody will trust you, or get off that planet and go travel the stars as a drow.
Well,
there's no sunlight,
yeah.
so you can avoid the sunlight sensitivity.
Let's wrap up with some archetypes and some ways to play against archetype.
Yes.
So what are our standard archetypes for elves?
So the two that spring to mind to me are Blade Singer and Ranger.
Yeah.
Like the top two to me, and that's sort of the...
And like High Mage, I would say that's probably there too.
Archmage, probably. High Mage, yeah, definitely. And so I mean, there's a lot of concepts that I think fit elves very well. And in that respect, I find the elf a very versatile race, which is why I make so many of them. Right. Because in my mind, when I'm thinking of a character concept, I'm like, okay, well, it's a bard of some kind, and then in my mind goes, well, wouldn't it be cool if it was an elven bard, or something like that? So I think the top ones for me, Blade Singer. The blending of magic and fighting amongst elves has a long pedigree in D&D. Mm-hmm. Going back to the original version of the game, they were able to sort of switch between the two classes on a per session basis. Through the first editions of the game, elves are able to wear certain armors and use certain weapons that are unavailable to human magic users. And so there's always been this connection between the blending of the arcane and the fighting arts amongst elves, and that's why I'd probably pick it as my top archetype for the elf. Ranger's just there's what's more classic than an elven ranger or wood elven ranger that stalks the edges of the forest, hunting down the threats to his village and in the woods that he calls home. But then the archmage, an archmage who's perfected the art of magic over her many long centuries and is steeped in it and knows every spell that there could possibly be and judiciously uses her power wisely. And so those are kind of top three, maybe.
Right.
Elven druid, there's a lot going on there. A lot of good conceptual space to mine in terms of maybe a different take. Maybe if your human druids are wild and animalistic and embrace the wild side of their connection to nature, that the elves are more like, they care more about the forest than they do the tree. Any one individual part of this whole system is, they care about the whole thing. Right. And they can live long enough to tend to the whole thing. Right. So whereas human druids might be more concerned about that particular herd of animals, or that particular wolf pack, or whatever, or that particular grove of trees that's going to be cut down. The elf is like, well, as long as the forest is what matters is an individual part of it. And then, of course, there's the drow assassin, the ninja. Come on, what's not to like? Yeah.
Get in, get out, don't get seen.
Get in, get out, don't get seen. There's a lot of different ways to take that mechanically, whether you go rogue, whether you go monk, mix in some warlock for some neat invocations. Conceptually, it plays to their strengths and sort of like, and sort of reinforces an archetype amongst the drow. Of course, you could go complete 180, and what if you have a drow bard who just, they just got to sing it out. Maybe I don't know. Maybe you say like, "Yes, Jim, I do want to play an emo drow. Yeah. I'm gonna play that emo drow to the limit." Yeah. You're just like, let you feel my feels.
Love is pain, love is life. Yeah.
So that would be an awesome concept as well.
Okay, but how would you go against archetype and to make an interesting elven character? What springs to mind there?
Springing to mind for like surface elves, I think probably it's a toss up between barbarian, paladin, and monk. I can think of elven concepts for those three.
And I've played two of three.
You've played two of those three. So I want to hear about those in a minute. But yeah, so our elven barbarian is that like, what's going on with the elven barbarian? An elven monk I'm sure there are elven monasteries where they train and physical perfection is just as important as magical perfection.
I mean, how cool would it be to learn kung fu from someone who invented it?
Right.
I mean,
I'm
an
sure
elf
there's
that's
some
lived
really
for
cool...
600 years, and this style has been passed down.
I'm imagining now, having recently seen Doctor Strange, where it seems like there is first off, if you haven't seen Doctor Strange, this is like D&D magic. It's like flashy, and they're moving, and they've got to say these things, and it's all these implements that they have to use to use the magic. So first off, Doctor Strange, great for D&D magic. I'm thinking like that, where they're all like doing their katas and their forms and at their monastery, while at the same time, the way that they move they weave semantic components into their kung fu moves. I don't know, maybe that's your way of the four elements, and that's how you see, the way of the four elements high elf, preferably with the way of the four elements that doesn't suck. Well, but still, conceptually, I would use it, and I'd probably still play the class out of the PHB just because the concept is interesting. You've got two characters, you said. You have an Elven barbarian and an Elven monk.
My very first 3rd edition character was a wood elf or wild elf. I can't remember which one it was back then.
I don't remember.
Barbarian. His whole thing was he was doing his rite of passage to become a man. Because they worshipped eagles. And he climbs up to the thing, and you're just supposed to leave a gift, and he I was just going to do a thing where he just fucked up, and he just fell, and he broke an egg, and this eagle attacked him and knocked him he lived, but all of his villagers are watching him get attacked and rejected by the thing that they revere the most.
Yes.
And so he's an exile. They exiled him.
Right.
He's a man. He has no honor in this world, and all he can do is seek a righteous death. All he can do is seek glory.
That's right. He's got to seek a glorious death to redeem himself. Yes.
Whenever our Dragon Slayer friend, when we interacted with the true neutral red dragon in the world to save it, he was like, "Let's go kill that dragon.
Let's go kill that dragon," because he's seeking an honorable death.
And he's seeking not. It didn't even have to be honorable. It had to be glorious.
Glorious death.
So in his head, he's like, "Red dragon, that would be a glorious death."
Sure thing. I forgot if he made it past the simulacrum or he fought the actual red dragon. Was he one of the ones that made it past? The Dragon Slayer did not make it to the actual dragon.
Because the Dragon Slayer was mazed, right? Or was I mazed? I can't remember if it was me or the Dragon Slayer that got mazed.
No, he killed the Dragon Slayer. The dragon killed the dragon. He probably mazed you.
No, he mazed me and then bit me in half. Yeah. I remember that. Yeah. So I was actually didn't even die fighting. I died in a haze of mental anguish because I'm a fucking barbarian. Yes. So, it's whatever, but I role-played him how I would. In my head, I'm like, we could use this dragon.
That was a hell of a campaign.
Yeah. Talk about that's how you TPK. Just do the worst thing possible.
TPK.
And then of course I've talked about Slayer Shadowfall, my Elven monk, a lot.
Oh yeah.
And it's just to me, it's again, I already said it. They just live so long. It's why wouldn't they perfect martial fighting, turning their bodies into weapons?
Absolutely. I just don't imagine elves are fanatical about much, or if they are fanatical, it's they take it to the next level. I don't, you know what I mean? So in that respect, I see elves as being more extreme than humans in their responses to things and their reactions to things. So they try to maintain this sort of calm, mellow balance, because if they get out of whack, it's way over here. Right. An elf that goes off the deep end is we got to get out. We got to leave the continent. Yeah. We got to nuke the site from orbit because they have gone off the deep end.
It's the only way to be sure.
So an elven paladin is one of those where obviously Paladin of Ancients lends itself well to sort of wood elves and guardians of nature, things like that. But what would an elf of devotion look like? An elf paladin of devotion. Are they dedicated to some sort of principles of Corellian Lyrthon or whatever, however you pronounce his name? The big elf god.
Lorathian? I don't know.
He's a jerk, by the way. There's nothing wrong. This is the problem with elves, right? The problem with elves is that they're just jerks. And all of their gods are we took the forest for ourselves and the rivers, and we got the oceans, and it's all ours, you can't have it. We took all the magic. You guys don't need any.
Yeah.
They're just screw you guys. And he plucks out Grumpsh's eye. It's just they're just jerks. But how do we know that they don't control everything?
Would it be the Elf Illuminati or the Illumel? Nah, it's
the Elf Illuminati.
Oh well. Anyway.
I don't know. That's where I go with it. I think that yes, the High Elves do control everything. They live for hundreds of years. Yeah. How could they not control everything?
Yeah.
That's
why they're not worried.
That's why they're not worried. That's why they're always just like, it's all right. Like, these people will come and go. Like, we'll be here for the next 500 years. Like this human kingdom, we give it 200 years.
Yeah.
Like, what do we care what it does?
I mean, come on, the last one only lasted 150.
Right. So that's just kind of, I think that playing up their arrogant superiority, first off, especially if they're going to be antagonists, is going to drive your players up a wall.
Yeah.
And if you're a player, be careful with that.
Yeah.
Be careful with arrogance and superiority. Maybe you're still a young elf.
It could lead to some good monologuing. Which,
Very good
as the
monologuing.
PC, you don't want to do that.
No.
Don't be like Oberyn.
Don't be like.
If you have the moment.
If you have the moment, just kill him.
Just kill him.
Make your speech afterwards.
Yeah.
With his head in your hand. No, sir, I don't like it.
Don't like it one bit.
Mr. Horse,
I need you to shove
how
this
do
right
you
up your
feel
butt.
about gritty kitty chocolate?
Way up there. Way up there.
Morty, what are you doing? Sorry. Oh, I don't know, Rick. Seriously, all I want is Willem Dafoe and Michael Cera to do an ad for Rick and Morty. That's it. Just do an ad. They're going through portals. They go to They go to Butt World. They go into a butt, and then it's Michael Cera and Willem Dafoe step out. What is this? Oh, this is 3 dimensions, Morty. Just don't think about it. Anyway, you've never had depth, Morty. Anyway, speaking of lacking depth.
Speaking of lapping depth.
Lapping it up.
Lapping depth. Lacking depths. Soldiers' shoulders. All right, I'm ready.
All right, let's do this.